This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, and Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
I'm talking to Emeritus Professor Stephen Parker, who's had a very distinguished career both as a lawyer, an academic leader, and as a consultant. If you want to find out more about Stephen, listen to the podcast that was done 2 years to the day by Jack Goodman. So I'm going to take a slightly different perspective, Stephen. And I'm going to ask you, first of all, you've been away both from the consulting time and also leading a university for a number of years now. What's your view and your observations from afar, both in Australia and because you've spent some time in the UK, but let's start with Australia.
Thank you, Judith, and it's good to speak to you and be with Studiosity again. It's true that the passage of time, I think, does help get a sense of perspective, and the dust settles in unexpected places. And also, I'm following the UK very closely at the moment with a new government. The university's saying that they're in crisis. There's proposals to cap international students there as there are in Australia. So it is a volatile time in both countries, or at least an unsettled time in both countries. My overall view of things is that higher education will be okay. Most universities are going to be okay, and some will absolutely thrive. So on that big question, is massive disruption going to come and the rug pulled out from under everyone's feet and so on? No, I don't think so. However, as I have argued a few times now, I think the golden age of universities and higher education has passed. That sort of golden age where governments were happy to put money into teaching and research, into expansion, and it fitted all the agendas around equal opportunity and so on. I think all of that has leveled off. And so I think the going gets tough for higher education from now on. But on that general question, am I full of doom and gloom? The answer is no. But I do think if I was in some institutions around the world, I'd be very troubled.
So talking about, universities have been around a long time, and I've done work in universities, Lund and Uppsala, that, 1466 and 1620, they've managed to survive and thrive. But COVID really was one of those disruptive moments that you alluded to before. But COVID had identified the adaptability of universities. Do you want to talk about your view about, do you think universities are adaptable, and can they adapt to these new funding challenges and the like?
Well, I don't think they're very adaptable, I've got to say. And I don't really think that the longevity of some is proof of a generic characteristic of adaptability. I mean, there are some that are no longer there under that name as well. And if you read various histories of universities, particularly focusing on the universities that came after the University of Berlin in the early 1900s, they were different kinds of institutions. And that particular model in 1 to 2 centuries became pervasive, but they were very different from Paris and Bologna and Uppsala and so on. Very different indeed. I think adaptability is actually a problem. And one reason, and an excuse really, is that universities have to be there for the long term. An academic isn't a journalist. They're meant to record the world at a deeper level and taking a longer view, and irrespective of the politics of the day. And so you can't expect a university to do what a university is supposed to do and then jump around and transform its operating model all the time. They're working on long lead times that survive many governments, particularly at the moment. So I think adaptability is an issue. And this feeds into other difficult agendas, such as universities being really relevant to business and industry. I don't know that they can be really, really relevant to business and industry. I think they can be of fantastic use to business and industry because of the research they do and the training and education they provide. But to expect a sort of hand-in-hand relationship between universities and their stakeholder, I think, is to misunderstand the deeper nature of what a university is.
So then, given what you said then, and I don't disagree with you, is there a tendency to want to redefine the purpose of universities? And is that what we need to do?
I think there's a search on to reframe what universities are about. And I think that is, to some extent, jumping to other people's agendas about relevance and, the return on investment to the taxpayer and so on. So every time, every 5 years or so, the university's got to do a new strategic plan, and it doesn't want to adopt the previous wording. So it just moves lots of words around as to its purpose and that kind of thing. But I don't know whether its actual underlying purpose is changed. It's just the way that it's trying to describe its purpose. Fundamentally, it's there to educate people at a high level and to do important research. In the course of that, some universities engage more directly with their communities than other because that's in their nature. But I don't think the fundamental purposes of a deep and quality education and research are actually changing.
Are people's expectations of what universities are wanting to do? So you've got different voices that are suggesting, government suggests that it's actually got to help contribute to the economy, jobs, employment. Communities are saying you have to help us sustain and build our communities. Students are saying other things. So what if you had your opportunity again to lead a university, would you reframe some of the things that you're doing to try to mediate and moderate some of these conflicting voices?
I think you've hit several nails on the heads there. Whether the underlying purpose of universities changed, I sort of disagree with, but the expectations from outside and from inside, they are changing, and that makes universities want to reframe their purpose and so on. If I had my time over again, well, first of all, I would go harder on student centricity.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily because I'm jumping to some kind of tune about it, but more so in Australia than the UK. I think the student experience has become thinner and thinner. There's been a disengagement for all kinds of reasons, including many students have got to go out and work and pay their way through and so on. So I don't think universities fulfill that sort of rite of passage, personal transformation, memory of a lifetime for as many students as they used to.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably the rite of passage model of university is still strong amongst the elites and the middle classes who predominantly go there. But, it doesn't describe all universities. So I would focus harder on student experience. And I'll try and remember this formula, but I think I came to the view that SX equals LX, CX, and PX. So I think what I was saying, Craigie, was student experience is learning experience, personal experience, and customer experience. So students are far more than customers, but they are actually customers. They're parting with good money and they want something. And they're there to have a personal transformation, and they're there, obviously, to learn. So if you can get the LX, the PX, and the CX right, then I think you're going to have some very happy alumni. So I'd focus more on that. And then I probably would resist government more. I mean, I do have some track record in resisting government, and I bear some scars as a result of it. But look, we're here to educate governments as well as students. Communities, I think that's a difficult one. Yeah, people are paying a lot of taxes, and especially in countries like Australia, where we tax income high, but we tax wealth low. There are a lot of hardworking people who are paying their income taxes when they shouldn't be, really.
Mhm.
And they should have expectations as to what institutions that are funded by their taxes do. So I've got a lot of sympathy with that, and I think that calls for a communication campaign. And the other thing I'd say, Judyth, which isn't solely about universities, there is seemingly a loss of trust and confidence in institutions generally in the modern world, and universities are classically institutions. So people just trust institutions less, whether they are governments, professions, universities, the church, and so on. So you bring all that together, and it's a difficult time for universities, and it's all part of the golden age passing, I think.
So what I'm also hearing is the subtext is there's got to be the balance between regulation, and we are a highly regulated system.
Yeah.
So the balance is about accountability and transparency. And
Yeah.
sadly, it's the regulation that seems to be driving those latter 2 points. So how can we get that balance so that, in fact, universities once used to be self-regulated,
Yeah.
and now they are externally regulated through TEXA and other organisations?
Yeah. I think, again, the nail has been hit on the head there. We've got to really focus on accountability, but regulation of the kind that we've got is a problem. It's way too detailed. It has a tendency towards some mythical notion of what a university is, so an ideal type, you might say. And I actually think that TEXA and the higher education standards, they inhibit diversity and experimentation. So I do think there are things that need to be done about regulation, but accountability, I think that's really important. And one of the strange things that's happened since universities were also told to behave like market actors, to go out and compete with each other. Maybe universities have got the sense that they're not public institutions anymore. Yes, they've got a lot of public legacy behind them, but they're out there as corporate titans fighting with each other and so on. I personally think it's just a load of bollocks, really. Public universities are public institutions. They owe it to the public to do public good, which is the reason why I resisted strongly fee deregulation. It would send us down that non-accountable road.
Mhm.
And, if that had gone through, universities don't have shareholders, so they're not accountable to an AGM. They're not particularly accountable to their governing bodies who come and go and aren't experts. So they'd have been accountable basically to no one, I think. Sort of regulated but not accountable. And so I think it's time to get accountability back. And there are some expensive missteps in the past of many universities, and these need to be brought out into the open, and like other public bodies, like robo-debt, like everything else in that sphere.
Well, given particularly that you've brought sort of other political debates into place, are we asking the wrong questions about higher education? And what are the questions that we're not asking that we should ask?
Well, I think somewhere we're asking the right questions. We're just asking so many questions about higher education. We're lost in a fog of questioning about it. If I could just sidestep this for a moment and talk about disciplines, because by and large, universities are organized around disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
By and large, I know it may not always seem that way, and we get little renaissances of multidisciplinary studies and belief in it, but but there are all kinds of reasons why we are. And all of that's a fairly recent phenomenon. It is actually since really the founding of the University of Berlin, and then later in the 1800s, Johns Hopkins University. And so by the mid 1900s, we had all these disciplines: sociology, economics, history, and so forth, psychology, anthropology, and they all had their methodology of how they found things out, and they had their epistemology as to what counted as knowledge, and they had their ontology, you know, how the world was out there. And it was all very comforting and reassuring and so on. And it probably was the best we had available to us. We couldn't find out things any other way. But with new technology, with AI, machine learning, supercomputers, and at some point quantum computers, there is going to be a huge amount of at least data, if not information, out there, and ways of looking for patterns and causes and effects that completely surpass what a discipline can do. And we're starting to see it. So an example is real-time economics. Now, economic data can be fed into supercomputers, algorithms can be used, and you can make sense of spending patterns and so on in almost real time. Whereas economics is used to waiting a year until some official statistics come out, and then there will be long mathematical papers there, which almost no one read, trying to explain it. And that's how the discipline moved on. But actually, I don't know whether anyone in Treasury is listening to that kind of stuff anymore. And they're getting real-time data. And that's just an example. Another, Google's AI laboratory, OpenMind, it's discovered the structure of all known proteins. And it would have taken laboratories, university laboratories, 200 years to get there. So outside of universities are all of these developments around knowledge. I think what they're going to do is they're going to blow the idea of a discipline apart, that disciplines give less adequate explanations of phenomena and trends and so on than what can be found outside. So I know this is a terribly long-winded answer, but the big question I think we should be asking about universities is, are they able to cope, keep up, join, participate, lead the new ways of discovering things, which are now very, very possible? That's the biggest challenge. And we put it a different way. I think technology is more of a challenge to research than it is to teaching and learning.
I think you're right. So do you want to try to answer that question that you posed?
Well,
in some respects, you've already answered it. It's going to be a bigger challenge to research than teaching.
Yeah.
But what then does that mean in terms of particularly that things like status and rankings are based on research outputs and outcomes, as opposed to, you know, high quality student experience that grows the next generation of researchers?
Yeah. Well, it's hard. It's a hard one. I mean, if you're a vice-chancellor sitting in the chair, you can't suddenly reinvent the university. You know, the world will collapse around you. You can't say, "Oh, our disciplines are dead," and students can just rock up to any class they want, and they can assemble their degree from an amazing smorgasbord of units. You know, you've got to have some kind of structure. Education, or a curriculum, is a course of learning, not just being battered by knowledge. On the other hand, I think we have to really question disciplines, and over time, we've got to go back to that thinking, which some of it is 100 years old, about multi-interdisciplinary studies. How can we find out about the world, and how can we teach about the world without being blinkered by various traditions, which were human creations and probably the best that could be done at the time? So if you want to reinvent universities to be, well, not so much relevant, but just to give better explanations, then I think you're going to have to move away from disciplines, because I think they're going to become straitjackets.
But getting back to Google, in many respects, Google is always driven by an economic imperative,
Yeah.
profit imperative. So in order to do that extraordinary work, the driver is actually economics. Universities is about knowledge in itself for its own sake. So, I mean, we've got probably quite an interesting tension that will emerge. But how do you manage that tension so that it becomes productive rather than paralytic?
Well, you don't want universities to be residualized, to be only answering the questions that for-profit organizations don't want to answer because there's no money. Otherwise we'll just all be, I don't mind if we're all historians, but I think we've got to have more than historians. So we're going to have to really look at how knowledge is discovered, generated, curated, interpreted. And if this involves doing similar kinds of things or forming alliances with the Googles, or at least the open mind laboratories of Googles, then I think that's going to have to be done. The for-profit thing, I don't have a problem with for-profit, but I do think that universities can't really be for-profit. I think markets will ultimately always fail in education because the public good component just can't be picked up in a for-profit context. But alliances are possible. I read about remote laboratories. Here's universities, they've got all their own laboratories, often doing routine things. And yet in various parts of the world, obviously California, there are these robotic laboratories that can do it for you and you're not paying for the infrastructure and so on. So I think there's all kinds of, that's just an example, but all kinds of arrangements that can be done with the for-profit sector, which help universities work and their fundamental purposes. And just a closing comment on that, the last thing they should do is just turn their back on it and say, oh, it's all evil. I don't care whether they've discovered the structure of all proteins. I'm going to plod along and do my biomedical research as if they hadn't been discovered. You can't do that. So there's got to be some kind of accommodation here.
But that gets back to the accountability.
Yeah.
That researchers also have to be accountable for their research projects, and there's got to be an end in mind in some respects.
Yeah. And look, I agree with that in terms of publicly funded research. And I think this is where, the struggling taxpayer who, as I've said, in terms of income tax is paying too much, and when they read these tedious stories about funded projects, which sound esoteric and rather strange, I don't blame people for querying that. And I do think that academics, when they frame their research projects and when they apply for grants, they should do it in a language that people can understand and get a sense as to why it matters, rather than it just look like some great indulgence, a huge hobby that someone else is paying for. And I speak as someone who was on an ARC committee, choosing grants. Some of them came up, I struggled to have the first idea what the proposer was proposing, and this was in my own field of law. So that's part of that whole communication thing, that if you're going to do publicly funded research, I do think you've got a communication duty to say what it's about, why it matters, and even if it only matters in a fundamental long-term way of adding to our civilization, at least say that rather than just make it look like a glorious hobby.
So let's get back to students and experience, and particularly curriculum design and delivery.
Yeah.
What have we got to do in universities? And given what you said about disciplines as well,
Yeah.
What might the shape of a future curriculum look like, and what might be the delivery? What might that look like as well?
Well, I suppose I've got a two-part answer. I do quite like the idea, which I think is a North American idea, of undergraduate degrees that mix humanities and the sciences. And we've never really done that. We have joint degrees, and it's possible, but they're joint and several degrees. They're not joined up degrees. And so I do actually quite like that liberal arts science fundamental, foundational undergraduate degree. But I think we've got to start to think about domains of knowledge. So rather than necessarily economics, we've got to start thinking about, well, how do economies really work? And so that may mean that what we think of as economics and what we think of as business studies, they all start to come together and overlap, especially with statistics. So domains, the domain of health, rather than necessarily all of the very specialized subdisciplines, allied health professions, and so on. So at undergraduate level, I think we move away from disciplines and narrowness towards broader domains. And I think that'll be challenging in all kinds of ways. And then, of course, there is the undergraduate, postgraduate distinction. And I suspect people have to spend more years in advanced learning than they have done in the past. And that's more where you narrow it down further and further. But I do think we've become too cabined, too restrictive for young people. They are specialising too early.
I agree. Given the very quick development of AI and the sort of how universities have moved from thinking the Chicken Little phenomenon was going to happen to incorporating it into a much more thoughtful and reflective way of supporting student learning.
Yep.
What are your observations about AI and student learning?
Well, I've sort of followed the quandary that everyone seems to be in the education world about the arrival of AI, from we're going to have nothing to do with it to it's going to be a part of the modern world, so students can do what they want. I think what we've lost sight of is that when you put a course together, you've got some learning objectives. And you want to assess whether those learning objectives have been met. So it depends what the learning objectives are. If the learning objective is use AI in order to do X, Y, and Z, and then you assess it validly, and that seems to me to be fine. If the learning objective is use your own mind and go and do your own research, write your own words, then you don't have AI in it, but you've got to assess it. And I think there's some challenges of assessment facing us. I actually don't really mind exams. I don't even mind closed book exams. Ways of working out whether it is this human being that's actually learned this and can demonstrate that they've learned it. So I think universities might have been a bit slow off the mark. They've proliferated their methods and modes of assessment, and then they're being caught out by the arrival of some technologies. So it's not rocket science, this. It's, as far as I know, it's just basic educational thinking. What do you want to achieve? How do you know you've achieved it?
And how do you know that students have learned anything?
Yeah, quite. And absolutely. And you're going to have to test them in ways. And if technology is making it harder to test in ways we've been using recently, then use different ways of testing. I don't mind a 5 or 10 minute Viva, a live interview. I mean, it'll freak some people out. And I know there's a movement against high stakes assessment, but within reason, high stakes are part of surviving in the world, and a bit of trial at university doesn't seem to me to be too much of a challenge. And I should say, when I moved to Australia, which God help me is 36 years ago, and I arrived at
the lad.
The ANU where I worked, it had all these great assignments, open book exams, and that kind of thing. And I thought, initially, this is fantastic, because I came from a closed book exam tradition, compulsory attendance at tutorials at least, and so on. But after a while, I actually wondered how deeply people were learning things, as distinct from just sort of patching and pasting different bits of text together. So I know this sounds old-fashioned, but I can still remember things that I learned at law school in the 1970s. I don't know how much a lawyer will remember from what they garbled together in an open book assignment.
Well, one of the things that's still very strong in my mind is when I was teaching first years, students actually learn how to pass the HSC and to get a grade to get into university.
Hmm.
You then have to teach them in first year how to write an essay and how to be an independent learner.
Yep.
And we are still struggling with that.
Yep. I agree. I mean, having got an ACT background and their concept of senior secondary colleges, which are, deliberately meant to be somewhere in between school and tertiary education, I think there's something going for that. And I think there is something going for treating years 11 and 12 more as intermediate spaces than I believe happens in some parts of our education systems. And that means being an independent learner. Even telling students that they ought to be independent learners is a start. Sometimes we don't tell students what it is we actually think that they should be doing at the moment. So if you drum that message home, that you're on your own now, and attendance isn't compulsory, but there's a real risk that you're going to drift and have a great time. Having said this, I have to confess to some hypocrisy. I had a great time at university, and then I crammed like hell in the lead up to the exams, and it suited me. And then I know when I did all of these welcomes to first years, and I earnestly stressed how they had to work steadily and consistently and don't get behind, there was a voice in my head saying, "Well, you didn't do that." So I don't actually know where the balance is, but it goes back to that formula. They have to have personal transformation. They have to have a good time and explore things and so on. So I think there's a limit to continuous assessment if it's just going to be a slow water torture.
My last question is about leadership.
Yeah.
We're seeing different kinds of people with different experiences take on leadership roles in Australian universities. We've got people that have been public servants, people that have worked for large organisations. We've got a new politician that's going to be leading an organisation. What advice would you give these people who are going to have to learn the business at a very quick pace to be a successful leader in a complex multi-million dollar enterprise with competing political, social and cultural interests?
Yeah, they are tough gigs, these roles for anyone, really. I'm sure there are some generic qualities of a good leader, and therefore, some of what they've demonstrated in a different sphere is going to be of use in the university sphere. So I'm not trying to say that they're completely different organizations in that sense. But a good leader doesn't just have the skills to get people to follow them. They've got to be helping them go to the right place. They're not, it's not a skill to lead people over a cliff, kind of thing. So I think the challenge for the non-academic leaders coming into the sector is to understand where they ought to be heading, and then get people to follow them in that direction. And then the other difference is, leading academics is not like leading other people. There is that standard definition of a university that it's a group of independent scholars brought together by a common concern over car parking. They don't actually think of the university as leading them anywhere. They think of themselves as scholars, but for convenience, we need the car parking sorted out and that kind of thing. So, an unorthodox leader might come in and think, oh, and they're all looking to me for leadership. They're not really. They're just looking to me to be able to teach efficiently, have some time for research, not be driven into the ground by workload and that kind of thing. They're not actually looking for a messiah here. So if anyone comes in from another background with some kind of messiah complex, they're in for a tough time, I would have thought. So just to regroup that answer: generic qualities of leadership, definitely. Lead in the right direction, though, the direction appropriate for universities, not for some other kind of organization. and realizing that getting followership may be a lot harder in a university than in some other kind of organization.
Stephen, my last question
Mhm.
is, what are you reading at the moment?
Well, look, I'm dotting around at the moment. I'm reading Robert Harris's latest book, Precipice. I think I can't remember, has he had 17 books? But anyway, I've read them all. And
Ones about Cicero were fantastic, weren't they?
the Rome ones were that I think it was a trilogy. But even going back to the very first one, Fatherland, I thought was amazing for a young writer. So Precipice, I've nearly finished that. And then there's another William Boyd, which I think's out now, which I might have even pre-ordered that one. So I'm reading quite a lot of fiction. I still stay in touch with higher education kinds of reading. But I think I dot around, to be honest, Judith.
Stephen, I really enjoyed our conversation today. It has been unscripted, so I hope that there has been a coherence to the questions, but I just hope that our paths will cross again face to face at some stage.
I hope so too, Judith. And can I say the questions were entirely coherent? It's the answers that weren't.
Well, Stephen, enjoy the rest of your day. And
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure that we'll see and hear from you often.
I'm sure. Cheerio.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practice in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.